Good evening, everybody. We are going to let folks filter in. We have a lot of folks joining us tonight, so good evening or evening. We will get started in just a minute or two. We'll let folks filter on.
But it's sunny. It's evening and it's sunny, which is like, did that happen out of nowhere?
Feels like it.
70. We went from winter to summer. Done. No spring.
We're here to talk about the weather.
I mean, it's Minnesota, so
Right.
That's what we're here. Actually, what I will say for folks as we get started, I'm sure there are a lot of questions people have, and we're going to try to answer as many of them as possible. Please use the Q&A function to just put your questions in now. There are no dumb questions. I want to tell you that I started doing my work in the reproductive rights, health, and justice movement 4 years ago now. And I still have questions sometimes where Megan is like, let me tell you. And it's something I should know, but it's not, I don't know it yet. And so there are no dumb questions. There are no basic questions. Jess is a lawyer. Megan is an advocate. I'm a senator, a state senator. Between the three of us, we probably know the answer. So please
Also, like midway through this job, Erin, I have asked you to explain pregnancy to me how many times?
Many times.
Many times. So yes, no stupid questions.
No stupid questions.
And no need to assume anyone knows anything. Some of us went to schools without sex ed. We know nothing.
Yeah, the one person we don't have here is a provider. So that's a gap, but we try to know things about how healthcare works too.
I bet you there's a provider on this call somewhere. All right, well, we will get started. So I'm just going to introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin May Quaid. I use she, her pronouns. In my regular life, I am the Special Projects Advisor for Gender Justice. And in my other regular life, I am the State Senator representing Apple Valley, Egan, and Rosemount. Joining me today are Megan Peterson. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Executive Director at Gender Justice, and I use she, her pronouns.
And Jess Braverman.
I'm Jess Braverman. I'm the Legal Director at Gender Justice, and I use any pronoun.
Awesome. Thank you, Hope, who is a OBGYN who is with us.
Yes, Hope will help us when we get pregnancy and medical questions.
Awesome. So the first thing I just want to lay level set as folks come into this space is that I think we're all coming in here with a lot of different news, right? We've seen what's happened out of Tennessee. We saw a mass shooting today. We've seen these 2 court decisions. We've seen banning of gender affirming care, the banning of drag shows, the increasing censorship of teachers and taking away of parental rights. Like, we are seeing all of these alarming things. And this is a place where we understand that these are all connected. They are not separate and distinct from one another, but they are all part of a coordinated movement. One of the things we know is that the backslide into fascism, you can mark that with the accessibility of reproductive health, rights, and justice. And so if you're in this space and you're thinking about all of those things, and yet we're talking about one sliver, it's connected to all of it. And at Gender Justice, we recognize all of those things. Megan, Jess, do you want to just say anything before we jump in?
No, I mean, what can you add to that, right? Like just sliding into fascism.
Co-sign.
Awesome. Well, not awesome. Okay, so before we jump into the legal cases, we're just going to do a brief background on mifepristone. So medication abortion, which is more than half of abortions in the United States and in Minnesota, is a 2-pill regimen. It's mifepristone first, which stops the pregnancy, and then misoprostol, which expels the contents of the uterus. And mifepristone and misoprostol are both safe. Their medication abortion is safer than Tylenol. It's safer than penicillin. It is safer than Viagra. And yet we've had really, really special treatment of medication abortion and abortion overall in the United States. Megan, tell me a little bit about when Miffy was approved and kind of what that process was like.
It was approved so long ago. I don't even remember all the details. So
I was 10.
2000, the year 2000.
When I was
Where were you in the year 2000?
Babe. No.
Yeah.
So yes, it was approved in the year 2000 after a very lengthy, convoluted, overly politicized process. But it was finally approved in 2000 and has been available on the market since then, has been used by millions of people to safely end their pregnancies, and has, more, it has a huge, record of medical safety behind it at this point.
And people typically use medication abortion up to about 10, 11 weeks of pregnancy. That's what it's typically used for in the United States. That's how it's prescribed. That's not true, I don't think, in every country in the world, but that's how it is in the United States. So moving on, there was a case that was brought in Amarillo, Texas, by a group of physicians who wanted to put an emergency injunction against the FDA's 23-year-old approval of mifepristone. Jess, what is an injunction? What do you usually use an injunction for?
Yes. So I'm going to start with a really boring caveat, which is if you're a provider or a patient or an abortion fund looking for really specific legal advice, you can contact us separately for like legal assistance. This is not meant to be legal advice. It's just meant to be like educational information about these lawsuits that are going on. Okay. And I'm done with that required thing that I have to say. So preliminary injunction is where something's about to change, like the government passes some new law, right? Like, let's say the government passes a law saying like it's illegal to work for gender justice. And Erin says, wait a minute, I work at gender justice. Hold on. And so she brings litigation challenging the government's law. And she says, while this litigation's going on, I want to keep the status quo. The status quo meaning like what it is right now, which is that she works at gender justice, right? So a preliminary injunction is what you do to maintain the status quo while litigation's going on. And that's important because remember, we're talking about a drug that was approved in the year 2000. Like we are in a post 9/11 world, and the status quo is not like a pre 9/11 world. So typically for preliminary injunction, you need to prove a number of things, including that you're likely to win the case, like you have standing, meaning like you have the right to bring the case, you're going to win, your legal arguments are the best, you have the facts to support them. You need to prove that like when you weigh the different harms, like, you know, it makes sense for the court to put everything on pause, keep the status quo in place. These are the kinds of things that you need to prove in order to get what's called a preliminary injunction. And so we have two lawsuits going on right now, both involving preliminary injunctions. Megan, Erin, does that make sense as a non-lawyers so far?
Yes, I think, okay. And I just introed the Amarillo, Texas case with the physicians. So maybe just say a little bit about the second lawsuit that was also a preliminary injunction they were trying to do.
Yes. So there's two lawsuits that are important to follow right now. One is that lawsuit that Erin mentioned in Amarillo, Texas, which is an effort to go back in time and undo. I struggle with the right word to use because this actually isn't a thing, right? But like to undo the FDA's approval of mifepristone in the year 2000. So like the status quo of 23 years ago. There's also a Washington lawsuit that a bunch of attorneys general, including Minnesota, brought, basically saying the FDA is being way too restrictive on mifepristone, and we need to ease up on those restrictions. And so those are the competing lawsuits. There's Texas basically saying like undo the approval, which isn't a thing. And the Washington case saying like, whoa, you're being way too restrictive on mifepristone. It's safe, it's effective, and there's no reason to have all of these added rules on mifepristone in order to dispense it.
And what are those added rules, Jess? Because I think one thing to know is that like you can mail fentanyl through the mail, but up until the pandemic, you could not mail Miffy.
I mean, so it's funny that you mentioned fentanyl because it's like that's what mifepristone's being treated like, right? Like, so when mifepristone was approved, most medications that are approved, and you have your standard things, right? Like there's maybe a warning on the label if that's necessary. There's, you know, informed consent, right, that every doctor has to provide to their patient. There's just the typical way you practice medicine. And then there's what's called REMS, risk evaluation management strategy, which is like these added guardrails that rarely get applied, but sometimes do for drugs that are like, you know, this is a kind of dangerous drug, but the benefits outweigh the risks if you follow these guardrails, right? Mifepristone is like so safe. There's no need for all of these added guardrails, but for most likely political reasons, right? They've been added. Then there've been like even enhanced added guardrails to that. And so when mifepristone was first approved, there were limitations like only physicians could prescribe it. It had to be in person in a clinic or a hospital. There were all of these added rules. Over time, those rules have changed. Around COVID, they said that you can provide mifepristone, dispense it like through telehealth, basically. Like you can have a telehealth appointment and now you can send it in the mail. The FDA chose to keep that in place because it worked great during COVID. There was no elevated risk to doing that. You know, they found that to be the case, so they kept that going. But then in 2023, they passed new REMS for mifepristone, basically saying like you have to have a special certification to prescribe it. A pharmacy has to have a special certification to like dispense it, and patients have to sign these special forms in order to access it, which basically say like I'm choosing to end my pregnancy with mifepristone or something along those lines. And so there's been a lot of development, but like none of it really tracks the fact that mifepristone is like Erin said, right, safer than Tylenol, safer than penicillin, safer than Viagra, that don't, you know, all these medications, it's being treated like fentanyl, right? Like there's special rules for like inherently toxic medication, like, you know, like fentanyl would be in, mifepristone is treated kind of at that level.
Yeah. So I think there's been some really good questions that I just want to kind of tick off. So somebody asked, mifepristone is also used for other reasons. Mostly Miffy is used in abortion care, and it can be used in early miscarriage management. The other medication in the two-part regimen, misoprostol, is used to treat ulcers. And so that medication is available like over the counter in other countries, and is often used alone sometimes in self-managed abortion care. The one question, given that Miffy is so safe, what's the stated reason for all the REMS? And I think Jess kind of spoke to that, and it's because of the politicization of abortion care and of reproductive health care. And then the new REMS that were passed were actually FDA REMS. They were issued by the FDA. Am I correct on that, Megan and Jess? Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they weren't laws that were passed, I guess I should say. Right. Go ahead, Jess. What were you gonna say?
Oh yeah. And so I saw one question in the chat from Dr. Frisch about like, can you prescribe mifepristone this week? And you know, like I said, we can't give specific legal advice, and I would advise like anyone who does provide or prescribe mifepristone to reach out to an attorney and make sure that you are staying up to date. So there, you know, there's a specific legal advice for providers, and I would encourage folks to reach out if that fits, you know, if that describes you. But that being said, this week, yes, like this week, mifepristone can still be prescribed to patients. So what happened with these two lawsuits is rulings came out on the same day, one in Washington and one in, you know, my hands are not in the right place, like one in Washington and one in Texas. I also didn't learn geography, like it's not just sex ed. So the Washington ruling basically said that the FDA cannot change the status quo about the availability of mifepristone. What the Washington ruling brought by the progressive or the blue state attorneys general, right? The states where abortion is still available. That lawsuit says, FDA, you have to keep the status quo, like, which is what a preliminary injunction is for, right? To keep the status quo. So like, do not change a thing. Mifepristone has to like be approved. It has to be, you know, as it is right now. The Texas judge, in an extremely wild ruling, and if folks are interested, I could talk about all the reasons why that ruling's wild, but basically ordered the FDA, it stayed the approval of mifepristone. It stayed the year 2000 approval of mifepristone, meaning it put that on pause. It didn't quite unapprove it. It kind of like put a pause on whether that medication is approved. And so, REMS is the risk evaluation management strategy. It's about, sorry, I just saw a question pop up. What are REMS? That's what that stands for. We use acronyms and they're not super helpful to use acronyms. So I appreciate that.
It's the way that the FDA schedules drugs, you know, what's the risk versus the harm versus the reason and who needs it. And
the REMS are the heightened guardrails for certain medications. And so basically there's these two conflicting rulings, right? Like, so the court in Texas said, we're going to stay or put on pause the year 2000 FDA approval of like mifepristone, like you all have to have like frosted tips and wear like, you know, those bell bottom pants, like you have to go back to the year 2000, be as you were then. That's somehow the status quo. And he put that ruling on pause. Like he basically said for 7 days, nothing changes. But after that 7th day, if a court doesn't like act, then FDA approval of mifepristone is on pause. And so now you have these two conflicting rulings where the FDA is being told to do two completely opposite things. And we're going to have to see what happens. So yes, but butterfly clips, I'll put one in, like we're all just going to be there. And so this week is really like a lot's going to happen this week. So the Texas case, yeah, please.
I was just going to say the two different cases really sets this up to go to the Supreme Court, because you have what's the FDA to do? They have been told to do two opposite things. And so that's why this week, nothing has changed, because there is a stay on the court case out of Texas, and Washington saying don't change anything. So nothing's currently changed for these 7 days. But you keep going, Jess.
You know, I did have frosted tips in the year 2001.
I believe
just
that.
putting that out there. And so we're gonna have to wait and see this week what happens. The Texas case is already on appeal. So Angie, the Texas case is already on appeal, meaning the Department of Justice said, hey, Fifth Circuit, right? So you go from Amarillo, Texas, which is where all the conservatives bring their cases, because there is one judge there that you will get who's willing to go along with these wild conservative theories. It goes from there to the Fifth Circuit, and from the Fifth Circuit to the Supreme Court. The DOJ doesn't necessarily have to wait for the Fifth Circuit to do things before it can try to be like, okay, hold on, now we're going to go up to the Supreme Court. I would not be surprised to see that case get escalated very, very soon, but right now it's sitting in the Fifth Circuit on appeal. In Washington state, what the DOJ did was they asked for clarification. So they said, Judge, you issued your ruling 20 minutes after the Texas ruling came down. These were basically issued at the same time, right? Like you both hit send at the same time. So you didn't incorporate what happened in Texas to your ruling. So tell us, what are we supposed to do now? And so Washington, they're asking for clarification, and Texas, they're appealing. And so that's what we're kind of waiting to see. Oh my God, Benny, is the Fifth Circuit, okay, you're about to be like very sad. The Fifth Circuit is very conservative.
The Fifth Circuit is very conservative. I think it would actually be helpful just to kind of put a container around who the people who brought the suit in Texas were. This group of doctors. I shouldn't put them in quotes. I know that they are medical doctors, but like I'm nervous about the care that they provide. And then also I wanted to just set up that, and like, who has standing. You talked a little bit about that, why they say they have standing, what the harm is that they're claiming. I think it's important to say that.
It's so wacky that it's hard to explain. I also just want to I want folks to know, yes, please keep asking questions. We will address the questions once we get all of this nonsense out. So don't worry, like, please do ask questions. We want to make sure folks leave with an understanding of what's going on. But it's complicated. So this is not helpful information for someone who wants to learn how to be a lawyer, because if you want to learn how to be a lawyer, you have to learn, okay, do my clients have standing? And that has to be based in actual like precedent. Like, what does it mean to have standing? Like realistically, like, will my clients have it? The basis for standing in Texas is that a bunch of doctors who are part of these medical organizations that are anti-trans, anti-abortion, like they exist to do advocacy in those arenas. They are basically saying, because they don't prescribe mifepristone, they could get a client one day who was prescribed mifepristone, has a serious side effect, even though that's exceedingly rare, right? But they're saying like, we could one day have a client come to us, even though like we're anti-abortion, but they had an abortion, now they come to us. They have an extreme complication. We have to deal with it. And that takes time away from other things we're doing. And that could theoretically happen. And therefore we have standing, which is wild. Like typically to have standing, you have to be like, I am being harmed by this thing right now. And here's how, in this concrete way. So,
and I want to note too, that oftentimes when cases are brought about abortion and about laws that restrict access to abortion, often providers do bring those cases because they are a stand-in for their patient. But in this case, there's not even actual patients that these other doctors are standing in for because they don't provide abortion care and they've not seen people who've had complications from taking Miffy. And then, Megan, I want to come to you because let's say we take Miffy out of the picture and we just go with misoprostol, then what happens?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say something about how the plaintiffs in this case also are framing it. I don't know if folks have heard the Alliance Defending Freedom lawyers on the radio talking about their case, but they're bringing back language from like the 70s too. I mean, they're reaching so far back on this case, it's bananas, including calling medication abortions chemical abortions and really
abortionists, like old abortionist shop with like 2 P's and an E, like
yes, and just telling these wild stories about all these patients, arriving in emergency rooms and having all these complications. And it's like, I think after 23 years, if this was a really concerning reality, we would know about it. It's just not true. And I was in the car with my kid the other day. And I just kept yelling at the radio and he was like, "Mom, shut up. Like, you're being so annoying." So just when you hear that stuff, if they call medication abortion a chemical abortion, that's the only flag you need to know, oh, I'm going to hear a bunch of lies. So to your question about medication abortion, if mifepristone were to be taken off the market, which, to be clear, my understanding is that even if it becomes unapproved by the FDA, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean it would be completely unavailable. Is that right, Jess? Like, there are drugs that are not approved by the FDA that people can buy.
This is super complicated because I'm not aware of it happening. I think medication has, like, in very rare circumstances, the FDA has like withdrawn its approval. That's not common. It's super uncommon. There's this thing called the FDCA, which is like the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. I can't remember exactly. It stands for something along those lines that basically gives the FDA enforcement authority over violations of like FDA related stuff. So if someone's prescribing an unapproved medication, theoretically, the FDA could take action ranging from criminal to civil, but the FDA has broad discretion on whether it will take any kind of action like that. And so, there's other potential implications, right? Like if you're a doctor and you're sued for malpractice and then you're using a medication that's unapproved, right? There's lots of reasons that this is going to have, I think, a chilling effect on some folks. But we're in like a bit of uncharted territory. But yes, the FDA, it's not like the mifepristone, it can't just like disappear, right? Like the judge issues his order and suddenly you're holding a box that like vanishes.
Right.
So it's like still out there in the market. And so the question is, what happens if someone prescribes it? And I think that's it's a complicated question. I think the FDA has some discretion there. Yeah.
Well, and then
But
Megan,
it's a legal murky area that probably most providers don't want to be wading through, especially as so much nationally around reproductive health care. The waters are getting legally murkier and murkier. But so let's go with the path, like the projection into the future that mifepristone is unavailable. What will patients do? What will providers do? So there is an alternative protocol that uses misoprostol alone. Misoprostol is the second medication in the medication abortion protocol. It, as Erin mentioned earlier, is a drug originally approved for use for treatment of ulcers. It is widely available in other countries over the counter, could theoretically be over the counter here, although it is not. And in countries where abortion has been illegal, especially like in Latin America, it is a very common way that people self-manage their own abortions was through misoprostol alone. So we know that providers here in the United States are already developing their protocols for offering misoprostol alone abortions to their patients should mifepristone be taken off the market. The thing to know about misoprostol alone is it is also very safe. It is also very effective. There is differing research on if it is the same level of effectiveness as the 2 medication protocol. However, it is not as good of an experience for the patient to use misoprostol alone. And there is a reason that the 2 medication protocol is the best practice and has been the best practice for the last 23 years. When you use misoprostol alone, you often are in the process of having an abortion for longer. It can also be more painful. If you are in a state where medication or where abortion is illegal and you're self-managing the abortion outside of the healthcare system and using misoprostol alone, you maybe would choose to take that medication orally rather than placing the pills vaginally. That increases the amount of nausea you experience, your likelihood of vomiting. So really what taking mifepristone off the market, the long and short is it forces patients to have to turn to a protocol that may increase their suffering in order to accomplish the same goal, both in terms of pain and timeline for completing the abortion.
Which could actually put them into emergency room departments actually doing the thing that the doctors said that's not happening will happen. So that's just one of the wild things about this case. I will add too that if you read the judge's opinion, so Judge Kaczmarek out of Amarillo, Texas, he is known for being anti-abortion. Up until his appointment on the federal bench, he was a member of a crisis pregnancy center. He was very, very open about his anti-abortion views. And throughout his opinion, he basically copy and pasted Alliance Defending Freedom language like over and over and over again. He used the term abortionist. He used the term chemical abortion. He also floated fetal personhood. There's like a little test balloon for that. Brought back the Comstock Act, which if I've read correctly, could make, if he's kind of floating out there, that would be illegal to like talk about abortion online and like male medication abortion. Jess, you went, ooh, at Comstock. Do you want to?
Well, here's the thing that I do really want to urge that if you are someone who provides abortion care, like don't take anything we say here as speak to an attorney, but because I'm going to say something kind of scary about the Comstock Act, but this isn't meant to be like legal advice on what folks should do if they are a provider moving forward. But the Comstock Act basically is this law from the 1800s where the Postmaster General of the United States, a government figure I never thought I'd be speaking about, but here we are, just was really anti vice, anti everything. And he decided to just make it illegal to send stuff through the mail that he didn't like. And it includes things related to abortion. The judge referenced the Comstock Act in relation to telehealth, but that's not a binding ruling on what the Comstock Act means for everyone in every application all around the country. So the Comstock Act is this really old law. It's rarely been used. It has not been used at all in a very long time. It is not being used to prosecute people who send abortion medication over the mail. But that's how all abortion medication, right? If you're at a pharmacy and you have mifepristone, you got that in the mail, right? So it's a scary invocation to invoke the Comstock Act. Again, that's an old law that hasn't been used in forever that forbids mailing obscenity, porn, and anything to do with abortion. It also used to ban the mailing of contraception, but that piece was taken out. I don't want folks to think it's now the law of the land that the Comstock Act is this broad. There's a lot of arguments to be made that it's inapplicable generally and that it's not actually applicable the way the judge said. So I don't want to give people the wrong idea, but he's invoking scary stuff.
Invoking it as scary. Yes. There are some questions that I think that are really important to answer. One from Wayne, our surrounding states are not part of the Washington state ruling. Can people take mifepristone across state lines? And what about getting it from other countries? So the first thing to know about Wayne's question, which is really, so there was it 18 attorneys general in the Washington case? So the Texas case was nationwide. And then the Washington decision was binding for the 18 states that were a part of it. Again, which is why there's this confusion. Every state in around Minnesota, so North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, people are not providing abortions in Wisconsin. They're not providing abortions in North Dakota because the last abortion clinic moved across state lines to Minnesota. I don't believe, are they providing in South Dakota? They're not, and then they're not doing it in Iowa either. So every state around Minnesota already is not providing abortion care. Can people take, and I don't know if Wayne is asking if people can take it from Minnesota back to Wisconsin.
These
for
are
example?
like super complicated. There's some super complicated questions. We're in some uncharted territory in
Yes.
terms of like the scope of the laws that are being passed to ban abortion and how broad they reach, and like, you know, what you would normally think of as like covered by criminal jurisdiction. I would say, you know, if you're someone accessing, we will say this, I think we should say this a lot, like abortion is legal in Minnesota. You can be in
It is.
Minnesota, you can come to Minnesota, you can have an abortion here, and a medication abortion, you know, so
In-clinic abortion.
that is legal here right now. If you have specific questions, you could speak to your provider who will, you know, who will talk you through it. You could speak to an attorney who can potentially talk you through it. But it's things are getting complicated, but I don't want folks to feel like they can't travel to Minnesota to have an abortion, or like if they're here, can I have an abortion? Like, yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
And there is a resource, the If, When, How legal defense line, which someone will drop the link in the chat here, but that is a resource, like a hotline for you if you are seeking care individually and want some legal advice. That is what that group exists to provide. And so they're great for talking people through. And I just also want to name, because look, when we you know, go back to pre-1973, pre-Roe, people had abortions illegally for decades before Roe. We are back in that situation in states where abortion is illegal. Abortions are still happening there. So while we're talking a lot about the law and the impact of the changing legal landscape, I just want to acknowledge that there are people seeking care outside of the traditional medical system illegally, or, you know, outside the law. And that, you know, is a whole new terrain also that patients and providers and lawyers are navigating. But medication abortion is a very safe way to have a self-managed abortion, which self-managed abortion is essentially when you are doing an abortion outside of the medical system. So that is safe medically, even if you are potentially taking some legal risk to, you know, get that care.
So I will just say, so Judith and Alex and Rebecca have some great questions kind of about the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, getting old laws off the books, and the other states having laws like the PRO Act. So we are going to get to that too, and I just want to name that. The other thing I want to say is that the intent of these lawsuits is not just to, of course, it's to ban abortion, right? Like that's the goal of the anti-abortion movement. Of course it is, but it's also to create this chilling effect. There was a story today in the Washington Post about two friends who had, it's called P-prom, and so it's where you have a miscarriage later on in pregnancy, but before viability. And so, you know, it's very dangerous to the person. You can have sepsis, you know, there's all these things, and they couldn't get treated at their hospital because the doctors were afraid that if they provided the care that they needed to manage their miscarriage, they would be charged with felonies. And so a woman literally had a miscarriage in a toilet in a salon and had to call her husband to come get her because she lost half her body weight of blood. I mean, like, this is having the intended effect of turning people who are pregnant away from getting care, whether it is for pregnancy, whether it's for miscarriage management, whether it's for abortion care. And so it is having that effect. Like, you're watching Jess try to be like, we are not providing legal advice here, and, you know, medication abortion is legal right now. This is the world that they have created. This chaos is the point. And sorry, thank you, Hope. It's not a miscarriage, it's the water breaking. Thank you. Can lead to, but does not always cause miscarriage. This is why I'm not the doctor.
I'm so glad Hope is here. Like, it's like someone
too,
needs
me
to
too.
like catch us if we say something ridiculous
Yes,
about like
yes.
how reproduction works. Like,
Yes, these women had miscarriages because their water broke. I think that is a better way of saying it. So anyway, and it was just this horrific tale of these two friends that were not able to get care, even though their water broke and their lives were seriously in danger. So, okay, I'm going back to, I think we're towards that part. Megan, I want you to just talk a little bit about, we're starting to talk about the end goal, and someone had mentioned, birth control. Someone else had been talking about other drugs that they use that can induce miscarriage, but are used for other things. Methotrexate being a really common one that's used for, you know, arthritis. I have a friend who has juvenile arthritis. She's been taking methotrexate for a long time. And pharmacies are withholding prescriptions for things that could be used to induce abortions, even though they might not be used for that purpose. But like, talk a little bit about what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, they're coming for all of it. As we're obviously seeing around abortion and around gender affirming care for transgender folks. I think it's very reasonable, and there are already signs of this, that they'll be coming for contraception as well. It's scary days. They are, I mean, I just think we should maybe have like a ticker of how many decisions are relying on laws from the 1800s, like from Dobbs to the fact that Wisconsin's ban is from the 1800s to now this decision on it's like, that is where we're going. They are trying to take us back more than a century in terms of our reproductive health rights and justice. And it's extremely alarming. And we really, I mean, we just can't ignore the alarm bells. You know, I know, especially since Dobbs, people have been paying a lot more attention to this. But this decision out of Texas is a really loud alarm bell. And in a lot of ways, it is more of a direct threat to abortion access for people in Minnesota than Dobbs was. Because Dobbs didn't change the status quo in Minnesota. I mean, nationally, it changed our sense of like our rights and our protections under, you know, the federal constitution. But in Minnesota, practically because of the protections we have here, it didn't change our access to abortion overnight like it did in other states. But this decision has the potential to very much change what kinds of care people have available to them. And it just betrays the lie of the Dobbs decision, the rhetoric from the other side around the Dobbs decision and towards all of the, from all those trying to repeal Roe for all these years has been like, we just want to return it to the states. We just want the states to decide. This shouldn't have been federally decided. This case proves what we already knew to be true, but irrefutably proves this is a national strategy. They are willing to reach across state lines into states like Minnesota that have decided over and over again through our courts, through our elections, through our legislature that we want to protect reproductive rights. They're saying, we don't care about that. We're going to reach into your state and try to limit abortion. And they are not going to stop until abortion is banned across the country, whatever the cost. And I just think anyone who, if you hear folks, including our own legislators, you exempted, of course, Erin.
I don't know. What is it?
No, but who is talking about like, oh, well, abortion is so complex and it's a hard issue. And, shouldn't there be reasonable restrictions? And aren't some of these restrictions on abortion reasonable? The restrictions are all a part of the same plan. They were the starting steps towards the end goal. They brought us to the place we are now, which is where we are facing very legitimately a full ban on abortion across the country. I mean, that is what they are driving towards, and it's not going to let up. Now they've really got some momentum. They're winning in a lot of places. So we just have to reject that entire way of thinking wholesale. We have to say, don't talk to me about quote unquote reasonable restrictions. That is an anti-abortion talking point, full stop. And if you want people to have the ability to make their own decisions with their healthcare providers and their family and whoever the people are that is appropriate in their lives to be making really hard, meaningful decisions about their families and their reproduction, then we just have to reject all of that. And we need to get all the bad laws off our books and just get the government out of influencing what care people can get when it comes to pregnancy.
And let me tell you about getting laws off the books. So I am the chief author of the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act. It will remove the laws that seek to restrict abortion care, jail providers, charge them with felonies, jail pregnant people who have miscarriages. I mean, it is a smorgasbord of crap. And I would say, with the exception of one, every single abortion restriction that has been challenged in court has been ruled unconstitutional in the state of Minnesota that this legislature has passed. And so it is time to remove them from the books. And we can restore abortion care to being treated like all other healthcare, right? I always say the guardrails, that's why I was doing this, are the people with the uteri, right? We are the guardrails. We work with our doctors to have the best care that is appropriate for us. And it's like, we don't have special laws written in about like specifically what kind of heart procedure can you have and at what point in your life can you have that. Like you figure that out with your doctor and yourself and your family, right? And so we restore abortion care to being treated like all other healthcare. And this goes back to, you know, our lovely neighbors to the east. Their abortion ban is from 1849, and I like some of our abortion laws are from, you know, 1976. Some of them are from like the 1800s too. I don't want to see those come back, and leaving them on the books means that they could come back.
Well,
and just because, oh, and go ahead.
well, we
Jess.
did. So Wisconsin has their felony abortion ban still on the books. We had one and we repealed it. And that's the reason why we're not in their situation, is because we actually like went through the effort of repealing ours. So when Dobbs came down and Roe v. Wade was overturned, there's a lot of chaos because states are saying, okay, we have this like 1800s ban on abortion. Is it still good law? Is it enforceable? Like, what is going on with it? We repealed ours, so we weren't in that kind of chaos the way that Wisconsin was. And so repealing laws that are unconstitutional is really important.
It really is. And you know, we did pass the PRO Act. The legislature passed the PRO Act in January, which is a great, it was a really, really good first step, but it doesn't get rid of the bad laws. And so the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act, Senate File 70, House File 91, really, really important to pass. And then the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act. Someone asked about that. Rebecca said, doesn't this latest ruling make passing the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act even more critical? Absolutely. The Reproductive Freedom Defense Act protects patients and providers who are in Minnesota who provide or access legal care from being prosecuted, jailed, all of those things. And so, I mean, it is more necessary than ever. I mean, I think we have seen the ratcheting up of going after not just people who provide abortion care, which has kind of been like the zone that the anti-abortion movement has lived in, but going after people who have abortions as well. Utah just they passed a law to do that. And I would say the trans refuge bill goes hand in hand with that, because these issues are deeply, deeply intertwined. It's controlling who does what with their body, who is able to live fully and freely in society, who's able to be a full person worthy of their dignity and, you know, life that they have, or who is controlled. And so that is, that's the overarching narrative here. And we talk about this a lot, is this, you know, this like Project Blitz, this white Christian nationalism, right? Like that really is the ultimate goal for the judge in Texas, for Amy Coney Barrett, for Mike Pence, for, you know, like this is the ideal world that they live in, is that we all live under white Christian nationalism and a very specific sect of their beliefs. And so we're just seeing that come to fruition. Yeah.
It's the same lawyers, like the same organizations pushing the anti-trans bills and the anti-abortion bills. They're like religious rights groups, and they're the ones pushing the bills that like ban like trans girls from playing kickball with their friends. And like I went to an Orthodox religious school growing up, and I read the like original Torah in like Hebrew and Aramaic. I saw nothing in there about like kickball and like trans girl, you know, like it's not a religious zeal for like women's sports and like, you know, promoting women's sports. It's about controlling the way people live their lives and controlling their bodies. And so we're seeing like anti-abortion bills being passed together with anti-trans bills being introduced. They're being introduced together, and they're being litigated in the same courts by the same people.
Yeah.
Reverend Kelly Clement says it's not there in the scripture. Thank you.
Although trans people do exist, and I believe that they do 100%, they do, and in many other religious texts. But so there's a question about where House File 91 and Senate File 70 are right now. What are the next steps? Is an omnibus bill in the works? So Senate File or House File 91 is in one of the omnibus bills, and then Senate File 70 is ready to go in the Senate on the floor. As a senator, what I can say is that a lot of, you know, and someone asked about waffling on the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act. My sense is that there's not waffling on these issues, that it really is an issue of time. So it took 15 hours to pass the PRO Act, and the PRO Act was 8 lines. It took 3 hours for the Minnesota Senate to pass tax conformity, and it was a unanimous vote. And so when we're, you know, we can only be in session 180 days in 2 years. May 22nd is the end of legislative session, and we literally have every budget bill to not only pass, but then to go to conference committee and get negotiated and then come back and pass again. And so I really think that some I think some of the issue is more of a time thing and less of a, we have people who are the problem thing. That's what I would say at this moment. I think there are people who could hear from their constituents. This is actually a priority. I actually do want you to spend 15 hours on this standalone. I think that could be really helpful. And Megan, feel free, because you're the advocate, you know, like, you go ahead, say what you want to say.
No, I mean, I do think, I hear you. I think time is real. And I think we saw the legislature move really quickly right at the start of session to pass the PRO Act. And that was great. But I also think that they need to move with the same urgency to finish the job. You know, the bills, both the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act and the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, are really like far more concrete. I mean, in a way, we're in this funny situation where we're here talking about how we can't rely on the courts. The courts are kind of a mess right now, especially obviously at the federal level. Luckily, our state courts are in a lot better shape. But the PRO Act, in a lot of ways, while it reaffirms the right, sends it back to the courts. So the two bills that remain to be done are really clarifying. It really is how the legislature can do its best work to make the law as strong as possible without relying on a judge to interpret it. And so while, yes, I know that there are barriers with our extremely productive legislature right now to getting all their work done, I also think the leadership and the bodies as a whole like need some pushing from advocates. They need to hear from us like, the PRO Act is great, but you're not done, and we really mean it. And when we sent you to the legislature with majorities, we meant for you to clean up this mess, not just say, yeah, there's a right again. Like, I think we need to do more than that.
And I think that's really important to hear too, because I think, you know, as somebody who does reproductive health rights and justice work, like, I've been watching with alarm bells going off. There was a great tweet, I believe Stacy put it out today, of like my speech back at lobby day, where I was like, this is coming. And so sometimes it feels a little bit like you're like shouting into the void, like, I don't know if y'all know how bad this is going to get. Like, we did briefings on how bad SB 8 was going to be. We did briefs on how bad Dobbs was going to be, but it wasn't really until it happened that people were like, oh, this is bad. And so just as somebody who's been correct this whole time, like, we should just listen to me, and we should do this right now. So we are doing super good on time. So I want to encourage people to put questions in the Q&A. Can you help us with those who have senators who voted no on SF1? Well, no, I can't. And let me tell you why. People who are anti-abortion, and it was a party line vote, right? So we can just say that it was the Republicans who voted against it. I'm just speaking accurately on that. They're not going to vote for the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act. They're probably not going to vote for the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, but they should not be let off the hook from knowing that their constituents have a deep problem with the fact that they do not support those things, that they have constituents who want Minnesotans to be able to make their own decisions about their healthcare without the government interfering, which, by the way, 78% of Minnesotans feel that way. So they're just wildly out of line and out of step with their constituents. But I do want to make sure that people pop their questions in. If you asked a question earlier and or maybe haven't answered it yet, pop that back in, because we still have like 12 minutes, which is great.
I see like some legal stuff I can answer if there's like,
yes.
One is like, why is the Washington ruling only applying to like certain states while the Texas ruling is nationwide? And that's like a really interesting question. I think it's two answers. One is that in terms of like properly crafting injunctive relief, the Washington court actually like took the time to consider how to properly craft injunctive relief. And what the court considered was, you know, abortion's available differently in different states. And so these specific states have come to us saying how the REMS or the extra guardrails, the burdens on mifepristone impact them, but it may not be true in other states. So I'm only going to apply this injunctive relief to the states that are telling me these burdens are a problem for them. It was just a way of kind of narrowly tailoring the injunctive relief. But the second part of my answer is like, I don't know that there's ever been a situation where an FDA approved medication is like approved in some states and not in other states. Like, that's just not really a thing. So I don't know how this will work. Like, there's, for so many reasons, it's really hard to answer a question of like, so what next, if that makes sense.
they've really made up law. I mean, or to bring these lawsuits, right? Like SB8 in Texas was predicated on the state wasn't going to enforce the fact that abortion was illegal, but just citizen vigilantes were going to, right? And the Supreme Court was like, that's fine. I like that's new and weird. And like, how do you what do you do with that? Right. And so now that they've created this whole new thing with standing, it's like, I don't treat these patients, but in 23 years that this medication's been approved, I could. And I have a problem with that. You know, like they're just creating new legal, excuse my language, shit all the time. And so for real serious lawyers and real serious judges and real serious groups who are like trying to operate within a normal world, it's really hard to like find our way through. And I think you're seeing that with some of the way that we're talking about it is it is really hard to say what comes next, other than the goal is to ban abortion. So we know that.
And then there's
Megan, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Jess, and then I have a couple I want to answer.
Oh no, so then there was another question, like if the FDA, like what's the role of the states once the FDA approves a medication? That's like a really great, very lawyery answer. That's like, you know, there's like people who love administrative procedure, like they're super like nerds for it, and they also love like preemption law and like all these things that like don't sound sexy, but like some of the coolest litigation happens actually in those legal areas. And so the question of like, if the FDA approves a medication, how can a state then say, like Wyoming tried to do, you know, like medication abortion's illegal, you can't prescribe the pills, but like doesn't the FDA as the federal agency in charge of approving medication, like once they've spoken, does a state really have the right to contradict it? These are interesting legal questions that are going to be answered in the coming months, years. And so it's a great question. It's a great way of thinking about it. I don't have an obvious answer right now, but you're going to see, I mean, I think there is at least 2 lawsuits about that topic right now. If you Google like FDA preemption lawsuit, like information about that will come up.
So I wanted to answer Alex's question, which is a big one from earlier on about, it seems like we're going backwards. Why are rights being taken away? It just is too good of an opportunity to talk a little bit about courts, elections, and also why elections matter. Because the reason we're in the place that we are right now is because because President Trump stacked the federal judiciary with people who shared his political ideology and were willing to bend the law to get what they want. That's the short answer. And, you know, the right for a long time has organized around their voter base around understanding the power of the Supreme Court, but of the courts in general, in a way that progressive folks really haven't focused. And so I think we're unfortunately, you know, reaping the results of that differential in attention to the judicial system. And the federal courts, unfortunately, you know, are appointed judges that aren't up for re-election or, you know, aren't elected, and they're lifetime appointments. And so it's not a good scene for us for a while here in the federal judiciary. But the state level, every state is a little bit different. There's a bunch of different ways in which state judicial appointments happen. But in Minnesota, our judges are elected. And there is a committee that makes recommendations when there are vacancies, and then the governor can appoint judges. And most of the time it's for the most part, they seem to get appointed first and then reelected on the next ballot. But, you know, I think as probably everybody saw in Wisconsin just last week, judicial elections are becoming more politicized. And I think all of us probably have feelings about that. And remember our civics class where we were told judges aren't political and they're supposed to be, you know, outside of the political system. That's just, I think, a unfortunate pass, or, you know, that's a pass that unfortunately is not likely to be part of our future. And so we just encourage people to really get to know the backside of your ballot, learn more about the judges who are running for election. We do have good state court system, state judges in Minnesota, and we need to keep them. So don't just go through and like I mean, I've been guilty of this earlier in my life, I will admit, but being like, well, whose name looks good? And I'll just vote for all the
And
women.
wait, and yes, do not
Yes.
just like go down the line voting for all the women, because every year this woman, who I think is currently disbarred, runs for like a judgeship.
Court.
She
Supreme Court.
believes in like the Bible, not the law. She's like anti-abortion, anti-LGBT, all this stuff, and she comes so close. And I think what's happening is people are like, oh, a woman, like
Name
don't
recognition.
Yeah.
don't do it.
So yes, so it's really, that is really important. If we don't want our state judiciary to go the path of the federal judiciary, we need to increase our voter knowledge about who's running to be our judges. And our state courts are a really important safeguard against what's happening in the federal courts. And we, need them more than ever.
Yeah. And I think too, that one of the things that's really happened, there was leaked footage out of the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, like they're a hate group, but they're a think tank. And they did this whole presentation recently where they were like, we're giving model legislation to legislators, and we're making it seem like it's a grassroots thing, and then we're getting it signed into law. And we just did it in Iowa, and like nobody noticed. And we realized, could it really be that easy? And so one of the things that I just want everyone to know is that gender justice works in the space. Like our adversaries are the people who are doing all of these things. And so when you sign up for our email list, when you sign up for information, like we are kind of shining a light on what's going on, and this like really quiet but powerful, well-funded movement that is doing all of this work. That's why we exist. I mean, it really is. I want to also just answer Elizabeth's question about the next 7 days. What should we be watching for next? So the Texas, and this also to Alex's question, how does a ruling in a certain state affect the whole country? The Texas case was in the state of Texas, but it was a federal judicial district. It was a federal judge. So that's why it's nationwide. So we'll watch the appeal in Texas. That's going to go to the.
That's
what did I say?
Sorry. That's not why it's nationwide. It's because
it was the FDA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, like what? Why is the Texas ruling applicable nationwide? Yeah, because it's basically like enjoining the FDA. Not even enjoy. It's like putting a stay on the FDA. So yes.
Yeah.
I'll just name
Stacy. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, Anne wants us to do a breakdown of judicial candidates.
Stacy asked where's a good place to find out about judges, and I'm gonna call out E.G. Nelson, who like put in a comment here because she always puts out a voting guide every year, and it's super helpful. So that's one place if you like don't mind a DIY voting guide. Yes, you should bow. It's a really good voting guide. And there's like the hard part is that like the people who really know the judges are the lawyers who practice in front of them, but like I'm not going to trash talk a judge that I practice in front of. That's crazy. And so like we can funnel our information to third-party non-lawyers like E.G. Nelson, who can like put together guides that are that have like anonymous sources.
Yeah, and it is something that we're looking at, how organizationally we can provide some non-politicized, non-partisan kind of information about judges, because they aren't partisan positions. That is true, and I think we all want that to remain true.
Lots of calls for EG to put their guide into the chat. So I
always just find it on Facebook. I don't know, EG, where do you keep that guide?
And then, okay, so for the next 7 days. So here are your duties in the next 7 days. 1, you're going to contact your representative, you're going to contact your senator, and you're going to contact the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader in the Senate, Carrie Dietzig, Melissa Hortman, and you're going to tell them how important it is that we pass the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act and the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, and that you appreciate so much that it takes so much time, but this is worth the 15 hours on the floor to do this. That's number 1. Number 2, gender justice is going to stay on top of both of these cases. So you're going to sign up for the info email, because we will email and tell you what is happening. When there is something that happens, we will email you and break it down. We might even do one more of these. And
we're gonna have to do one like every day to keep people informed, because this is so chaotic.
Busy? Are you busy? What could you possibly? You're not like a lawyer in court.
Yeah, no,
I'm a huge organization, and I'm definitely not in session. And so you're gonna sign up for those emails, and you're gonna check those emails. And I think the other part too is, donate to gender justice because this work that we do is important, but it takes money to do it. But also like look at your abortion fund, our justice. Right now, the abortion funds in the national, is it ACN or is it NNAF? Which one is doing the
National Network of Abortion Funds? Yeah.
National Network of Abortion Funds? These organizations are helping people get access to care, especially in states where it is banned. And it is like a hodgepodge of incredible people who are doing this work. We have seen an influx of people coming into Minnesota. And so if you can give your resources to your abortion funds, that is hugely helpful. I'm going to put the bills, or maybe Megan, you're doing it right now. Okay, Reproductive Freedom Defense Act and the Reproductive Freedom Codification Act. I don't know the Defense Act numbers, but the Codification Act, which is the repealer of all the laws, is Senate File 70 and House File 91. And I'm the chief author, and Tina Liebling's the chief author in the House. Dr. Senator Kelly Morrison is the chief author in the Senate, and wonderful lawyer Esther Agbaje, and the chair of the Posse Caucus, is the chief author in the House. Okay, we are kind of at time, but Jess, do you have any final comments?
No, just we're all like tired. So tired. But we're excited. Like, as you can see, we're real, like, this stuff like energizes us. Like we're all kind of going nonstop because we love the work we do, and we will keep doing whatever we need to do to make sure that abortion access is a reality for as many people as possible in Minnesota. So stay tuned to our work to see what's going on. We try to keep folks informed. If you have questions, you can email. Sometimes our inboxes are a bit of a mess, so if it takes a little while, we're not ignoring you. We will get back to you as soon as we can.
Megan?
Yeah, thank you. It's really, honestly, it's fueling to have so many of you here tonight,
Yeah.
keeping, with such excellent questions and so much interest and passion that you share with us for trying to make Minnesota the state we know it can be. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, like
Thank
we're
you all
so
so much.
proud. Like we're so proud that like we have legislators who say the word abortion, and like, like we, like that wasn't true like not that long ago. Like we're really proud of the work we've been doing, and we're really proud of our ability to like bring the information to folks. And if you find it helpful, just like tell your friends, and like the more people who know what's going on, the more people will think of things to do to make Minnesota even better.
Yep, you all are great. We will let you go. Thank you for extra 2 minutes of your time. Enjoy the sun, enjoy this weather. It's gonna be like 80 degrees on Wednesday. So we'll just like vamp until you all leave, or maybe we're gonna end it Grace style. We have a colleague who, when she is done with the Zoom, she just done with the Zoom and it ends. So we'll let everyone fade their way out. We'll send action steps and a follow-up email. Thank you, everybody. Have a really good night.
Thank y'all.
Yep.